So, this is the fourth episode of the ceremony podcasts or videos. Um, and I want to talk about the Sweatlodge and begin by restating a few points. Firstly, the main qualification for leading these things, holding these things, is that you've been with yourself. You've got to know yourself over many years. You learn to tolerate yourself. That's what one therapist said to me she feels her main job is. And by tolerating ourselves, one way of putting that is that we come into good relationship with our tribulations, the stuff that bothers us. Yeah. So we're no longer determined by it. We're aware of it. We're kind of friends with it. Yeah. We might hold our nose a bit, but we're friends with those things that bother us. Yeah. And we can live with that and not slip into avoidance of it through alcohol or whatever, or taking it out on other people. Yeah. And then we become whole. Then we're with our shadow. Yeah. And it means we can behave well. We can treat other people well. We can treat them objectively. Yeah. We can see them in terms of what they need rather than what we need. Even though we might not be conscious that's what's happening. So this is the kind of qualification that's needed. And also that connection with the, if you like, the metaphysical, with the sacred, with that sense of spirit at the middle, with this sort of pattern for us to unfold, this thing, deep thing we need to be true to. That's what really fuels. Yeah, we're not going to get into good relationship with our shadow side just because we ought to. Yeah, we need a reason, a deep reason. And the deep reason is that deep desire to be true to who we are. True to what is within us, that passion for that. And as we also know, when we're not true to that, we suffer, we get bitten, we betray ourselves. And life is often a process of just learning not to betray ourselves and just be really true. And that takes us outside of conventional expectations, because what we need to do deep down might be quite different to what the collective requires of us. And so it can require courage to step aside and quietly be true to who we are, or noisily if we need to, or if there's something that needs to be said that isn't being said. So all of that qualifies you to lead a pipe ceremony or a sweat lodge. And if you're in a traditional situation, you will have a proper training in the forms of that, as well as the work with yourself for years. But we haven't got that here. So what we do is we take a simplified form and we run with it. And we know it helps people. It helps us and it helps other people. And that is the qualification for doing it. Yeah. That justifies doing it, the fact that it helps. And if someone says, no, you shouldn't because you haven't had the proper initiation, your answer is, well, it helps people. And that's what matters. Yeah, it's compassion that matters, not, being right about the details of how things are done. So the pipe can be a very simple ceremony. I described in very simple terms in the last one. And a whole episode now to talk about the sweat lodge. Well, 4 minutes in already. A sweat lodge is, well, again, that can be simple. I mean, it's you need to build the structure. Yeah, and you need to look that up. And you need to go to a few before you run any. But like I described in a previous episode, there's someone I know who started running sweat lodges here in the 80s. He'd been to something like 2 in the USA. Yeah. And there were no sweat lodges here. There's no way he'd had any kind of training, but he'd seen enough of the form to be able to do something that would work. So him and someone else, that's what they did. They worked it out, they pieced it together, and they run one. In a traditional situation, that would be outrageous, and correctly so, because there's no training at all. But over here, Well, there were no sweat lodges. People would not have the benefit of sweat lodges. And we're humans. We can work things out. We can be guided by spirit. I mean, shamanic people say enough that, well, I was guided by spirit. Yeah. That's I get taught by spirit. Yeah. Well, there you go. Spirits will teach you. Um, what does that mean? Well, you might have guides turning up and you hear them saying things. You might be non-verbal like me in that realm, and you just get a strong feeling that comes from somewhere deep about the right and wrong way to do things. And if you follow that feeling about what's right, you train yourself in learning what's right, what's a good feeling, yeah, it will work, it will go well. And if you ignore that feeling, it won't go well. It hasn't got that kind of depth. So sweat lodge, yeah, you'd need to go to one or two. I think I'll draw a line at that. Yeah, yeah, and then work out your own way of doing it from there. Having done the work on yourself. So it is a structure made out of branches, and it takes quite a while to put up. Yeah, it's a sort of framework, a lattice, and a dome. You chuck blankets and then some kind of tarp over it to keep the heat in. You have a hole in the middle, and you have a fire in which you heat up stones. So it's like a ceremonial sauna in a way. And the stones are red hot, and you bring some of them in to the lodge, shut the door, and do the first round. After the first round is over, you open the door, you bring more stones in, so you have someone taking care of the fire. Yeah? And you have 4 rounds. Well, you don't have to have 4 rounds, but let's say 4 rounds, and you bring in 4, 5, 6 stones each time. And water is poured on them. I'm not giving you instructions how to make one here. I'm just going to give you a rough idea of how it works. And the stones they're people. Because remember, everything is alive shamanically. And the Sweat Lodge reminds us of that. The stones are alive. Yeah. And we give thanks to them. We talk to them. The leader will sprinkle herbs on them and thank them for giving their lives, because that's what they're doing. They will probably be crumbled by the time this is over, having been there maybe for hundreds of millions of years in the earth. They've given their lives for this ceremony to help people heal. And you thank the wood as well. The wood is alive. It comes from trees. We thank the wood for giving its life as well. The trees for giving their lives so that us humans can have this ceremony. And you do different things in each round, 4 rounds, different types of prayers. So beginning, of course, by giving thanks. You give thanks to the stones. Like I said, you give thanks to the trees. You give thanks to everyone who's running it. Well, you probably do that at the end, actually. You give thanks to whoever's provided the land to let you do that, etc., etc. You may want to thank the weather for holding out, the weather spirits for holding out and allowing you to have the fire. And then you make prayers. And sometimes people will do it collectively. I prefer to do it individually, and people can make them silently. So the first round might just be the giving thanks. Yeah, each person gives thanks in turn, and they can do it silently, like I said. Yeah, and then the round's over. And now water, each time someone has given thanks, yeah, this is one way you can do it. The leader will pour water on the stones and you get steam, and those thanks or prayers are taken up, but they also heat us up. And this is one of the things you learn at the beginning of sweat lodges, is to turn the steam into an ally, because it can be hard to bear. Yeah? It gets really hot in there and you can be suffering. You learn to bear it, and it's a good thing to learn to bear suffering. This can be a particular thing for men. Women learn to bear suffering through childbirth, but men don't have that sort of initiation. So sweat lodge and learning to bear it is one way, because that's part of life. Life is difficult, life is suffering, and we learn to bear it, and that makes us full human beings. That makes us strong human beings. And so we turn the steam into an ally. It's not just something we bear. We welcome it in because it's healing. It's coming from those stones that have given their lives. It's imbued with the Spirit and it heals us. Yeah, so we let it in. And I was told by a traditional person that the function of the heat in the sweat lodge is to melt us out of our rational minds and into our hearts. So I talked about that in an earlier episode about having a really hot bath occasionally. And that helps. Or a sauna is like that as well. It has that melting effect. But, it doesn't necessarily have that kind of sacred dimension and all those other dimensions that the sweat lodge has as well. But it does have that. And it's good for us to melt out of our heads because maybe particularly if we're men, we function from that. We function from our heads. And we need to. It has a purpose. But we can forget to feel when we get into our warrior mode, where we're making all sorts of things happen, struggling through our difficulties. We can lose that feeling connection. So the steam helps us give thanks and to pray from that heart place. So if you remember, I was talking in the pipe ceremony about, we have plenty of time to talk, and that enables us to circle around ourselves, so to speak, and eventually let what is in the heart up and out. And it's the same with the sweat lodge, but we've got the steam there to help us. We're just, in a way, naked. Sometimes people are naked in sweat lodges. Sometimes they're wearing something. 20 years ago, it was almost de rigueur to be naked, and it's almost like you had a problem if you weren't. And there is something in being naked. It's fantastic, but people don't do that so much now. They generally always wear something. Times have changed. I'm not saying one is better or worse. I think it is better to have clothes on because, there will be certain people that it's difficult for. And maybe they'll feel that they'll be judged for saying they find that difficult, that they're uptight or something. And no, it can just be ordinary containment, ordinary propriety. Why would you want to be naked in front of a bunch of strangers? Well, maybe you don't, and that's entirely reasonable. But the principle behind it is that you go into a sweat lodge to die and to be reborn. You go in naked. You give up everything. You're melted. You make your prayers from your heart, and you come out. You crawl out, newborn. You always crawl inside the sweat lodge. You bow as you go in. Put your head on the ground. You can say Mitaquiasan, which means for all my relations. You're doing this for the whole world because everyone, everything is your relative. For my mother-in-law, even for your mother-in-law. So yeah, first round, maybe it's giving thanks. Second round, you maybe make prayers. You ask for things. And ask for what you need. I didn't make this sufficiently clear when I talked about the pipe when you pray, but you ask for what you need. Someone I know, they almost had like this bucket list. Yeah, it was actually the person who taught me the pipe ceremony. She didn't quite get this. I learnt the forms beautifully. There's a beauty to the way she did it. And I really learnt from that. But she would have like this bucket list of all the things she wanted. And it didn't feel to me like it's come from a heart place. And I could see that she often didn't get the things she prayed for because of where it was coming from. Yeah, she hadn't understood. Again, she also was attached to forms and didn't understand that heart place. And this is what chaos shamanism is about. It's always finding that heart place in everything you do in life and in every ceremony you do. It's finding that heart place that will tell you what it is you're doing and why you're doing it. So prayers are not like a bucket list for things, oh yes, I'd like this, and oh yes, I'd like the other. Yeah. And I mean, there's a funny relationship between praying because on the one hand, you do need to be specific about what it is that you need. Because then that is a better channel for what's in your heart. Your heart will go, yes, that is exactly it. Yeah. But not detailed in the sense of, well, maybe you want a partner and maybe he's got to be 6'1" tall. Yeah. He's got to have biceps that are that big. He's got to earn that much. Yeah. It's not that kind of detail. It's not that kind of detail. I'm not sure if I've got the words for it. Yeah. So you need to be exact and precise. Yeah. This is it. When we talk from what's in the heart, there's exact words for it. This is why being educated, this is why being well read, this is why having a good vocabulary is good. Because it means you can give words to exactly what's in your heart, the nuance of what you're feeling, and then the prayer will be made exactly and powerfully. But as for outcome, you can't be detailed about that. That's why you can't be detailed about the size of the man's biceps. You can't pray for that. But you can pray for someone in your life. Maybe you won't get anyone, and maybe you'll learn from that. Yeah? That can be how it works as well. Because if it's coming from a heart place, there will be a response. It might be the opposite of what you want sometimes, or what you think you want. And another thing I should mention is that we call in the powers of the directions. There's a direction for each round. You can go east, south, west, north. There's ways you can play with it. Yeah. Play's the wrong word, but feel your way into it. So if you begin with the east, that's the powers of the east, the powers of inspiration, the powers of fire. Yeah. You're calling that in at the beginning, because the east is the beginnings. And that's maybe the round in which you give thanks. Yeah. And then the next is the south, and that's the place of the child, and where we can feel wounded, where we can feel tender, where we can feel vulnerable. And that's often the place we're praying from in the second round of the south. We're asking for help in our difficulties in life. And then the third round, that's the west. That's the adult. The adult is responsible. The adult takes care of other people. Jordan Peterson talks about that a lot. That if you want meaning in your life, be responsible. Yeah. Do something for others. Yeah, this is why having a family can make you grow up and give meaning to your life. So this is the adult. Yeah, that place of responsibility. Not in the. I mean, responsible can sound a bit worthy, can't it? But if you think about it, it's about the ability to respond from your heart. So it's a delight. It's a joy. It's not you ought to be responsible and do things for others. It's not about that. It's a heartfelt place. And as an adult, what if you've got a family? They are more important to you than yourself, and that's so good for us as humans when there's other people that matter to us more than we matter to ourselves. And so we pray for others in the third round. And I talked about that with the pipe. So that we're not, again, detail. Yeah. We're not being too prescriptive because we don't know what they need, but we know they need help. You know, they may be physically ill. They may be looking for a job. We may know certain things they actually need because they've said so and we can see it. And we can pray for help there for them. In fact, there may be a purpose to the lodge. Traditionally, the lodge has always had a purpose. You didn't just do it because it was Sunday. You did it because someone needed healing. And it's a community thing. Because if one person is ill, the whole community is out of balance. And maybe that's why they're ill. Maybe there's something out of balance in the community. Who knows? But that can really help people heal is when you've got a collective praying for them. Yeah. And they're in that place in the Sweatlodge where they can pray powerfully because they've been brought into their hearts and they've been brought close together with each other. And again, you have that quality of subornost that I talked about, that collective phenomenon where there's this sense of community, deep sense of community, where your individuality is heightened instead of diminished, which is often what happens in collective situations. And it's quite a special thing. You don't have to know the people for that to happen. So in the third round, you pray for others. And then the fourth round, that's the north. That's the place of the elder. You pray for wisdom. You can pray for things for the whole world. Yeah? Although, again, it's good to be specific here. Not just pray for world peace. I mean, you know, You can pray for, you know, as it is now, may there be less suffering in Gaza. You don't want to go and start taking sides and all the rest of it, but you can certainly pray for um, less suffering. You can maybe make prayers that you'd forgotten about in the earlier rounds for yourself or for others, or things you wanted to give thanks for. And maybe there'll be a lot of songs as well. Maybe the final round will be just songs. It's up to the leader what they do. I mean, you can get books of sort of good Sweatlodge songs, CDs of them, things like that. Or people can bring their own songs. I've been in a number of lodges that were run in a very particular traditional way, and I talked about this in an earlier chapter about the need to be able to run them our own way and not be put off by the vibe you get of you can't come anywhere near this. It's so detailed, so specific, has to be done in this detailed, specific way, and you're not being taught to do that, which is fair enough. But I also had experience of a woman from America come over from the Lakota reservation. She didn't know how to run sweat lodges. She said she got a spirit in her handbag. She brought over for the sweat lodge. She was just playful about it and humorous. And she knew none of the forms. And she was telling us in the lodge, just go out and run sweat lodges yourself. She really didn't feel it mattered how it was run. And you got the feeling also that she felt that this thing, you've got to do it this way and you can't come near our traditions. She felt that was a kind of male elder thing almost. Yeah? So that relativized the charge of cultural appropriation. That's just rigid old men, yeah, who are doing that, yeah. They would. I'm a woman, I see it differently. You go and do this. You share this. Yeah. It's about compassion. That's what matters. It will help people. That's what really mattered to her. And you could see she had a compassionate heart, and she knew nothing about, literally almost, about how to do it. Yeah. And that was great. It was so refreshing. It was almost sent my way as a counterbalance to all this, well, beauty, but kind of dogmatic as well. And then when the fourth round's over, thanks are given. Thanks to the leader of it. Thanks to the people who've kept the fire. You have someone in the fire tending it, ideally. Yeah. While all of you are in there. Sometimes they come in as well. And there is a spirit road. You maybe put some sort of flour down or corn grain or something that connects the fire to the sweat lodge. Yeah. They're male and female. The fire is the stones in it are the male. They're the seed. Those are the stones. And then the womb is the sweat lodge. You bring the stones in. The male and the female join. And something happens. Something is born. And we are reborn. So there's all this beautiful symbolism around it. Sweat lodges are one of my favourite things. They're a lot of work. I really recommend do go in one or two. And there's different ways of doing them. You don't have to stick to the traditional way of building them. I used to have a mini collapsible sweat lodge. I got 5 boards, right? And I think it was 5. No, it was 4. This box shape. Yeah, I just sort of put it up and take it down, sling something on the top. It was tiny. It was like 5 foot across. You could get about 4 or 5 people in there at a squeeze. But it meant you needed about 2 or 3 stones per round. So you needed a much smaller fire. It took a lot of the work out. I'd painted each wall a different colour for the directions. So we had the 4 directions in there with us. And I mean, I like to get it really, really hot. And you have to use up all the stones that are in the sweat lodge, that are in the fire. And you bring in a bucket of water that you put on the stones. You ladle it on in each round, but you have to have used all the water up by the end as well. And so what I do is like, okay, we'll have what we call a thunder round at the end. There's still a load more stones in the fire. We've still got a load more water. We're going to put in all the stones that are left and all the water at once. We're going to be absolutely boiled. So whoever was up for that would stay in for the final round. And that's what we do. Oh, oh, you really have to bear it. Yeah, but I love that. I love having to fight. Yeah, having to struggle just to bear it, to make it my friend. Yeah, I love that kind of challenge. It's a warrior challenge. Yeah. And um, but that's not the only way of doing a sweat lodge. A sweat lodge can be done really gently, like a deer. Yeah, that sort of soft deer energy. That can be just as powerful in a different way. And some people can experience the lodge differently. Magic can happen in there. You might find yourself that the sweat lodge has disappeared and you can see the sky and the stars. People have visionary experiences in the lodge. And some people will experience it differently to others. Some people might experience, oh, this is a really gentle healing lodge. And another person will be experiencing this as really hot and they're really having to struggle. And that can be to do with the magic of the leader as to do with anything that is so-called objective. And when you're leading it, it's like something is working through you. I haven't led a lodge now for some years, but the last one I led, and that again was the first for some years, something new came in. I felt it was almost like something had my hand. This feminine presence had my hand, and it would I would speak from that. I would pour water from that. The feel of how I was came from that, and it was just very easy, very smooth. And I had someone next to me in the lodge, big guy, who was worried about coming in because he gets claustrophobic in these small spaces. And the last lodge he'd been in, he'd been somewhere near the back and had been told, if you leave the lodge, you can, during a round, you can say, please open the door if you're claustrophobic, but you can't come back in for the rest of the ceremony. Yeah? And so he was put under this pressure that if he left, he wouldn't be able to come back. And I said, no. And that is one traditional way. Fair enough, in a way, but that's not the way I work. And I said to the guy, okay, you sit next to the door. So if you do need to leave, you can leave straight away and you can come back in the next round. And so I took all the pressure off of him, and that's what he did. And he just stayed throughout the whole lodge without a problem because he knew he could leave. And he was actually having visionary experiences in the lodge. In a way, I just used common sense. Someone I know who runs in a traditional way, when he started doing them over here, now traditionally a woman on their moon time wasn't allowed in. I don't know the reasons for it, but all sorts of stuff around their energy and where that was at, etc., etc. I don't know how all of that worked. And he continued to follow in that tradition. And then one of the earliest lodges he ran over here in Europe, was his native Canadian himself. He'd said the women on the moon time cannot come in. And then he saw them sitting there and he felt they are feeling left out. Yeah, because this was alien to our culture. So he then changed his mind and said, okay, you can come in. So he was able to be adaptable, but it took time. Yeah, it took him a lot longer than it would have taken one of us because he's immersed in a tradition and he has to think very carefully before he changes anything. Because we don't, and we have a freedom. There's a depth in a way we don't have. There's also a depth we do have because we're free, and if we're true to that in a deep kind of way, then it all works out, and we do really have something. And this brings me back to, well, we've got the goods as well, and one way we have the goods is through our freedom to reinvent and to really be true to something and not feel we have to follow the forms. But it's coming back. There's a dance there. It's such a rich area between, the forms and the essence. That dance between them. And that's really important for chaos shamanism, that it is a dance in which we claim the essence behind the forms, but that we take the forms seriously. Even the simple one I gave with the pipe ceremony, well, that pipe is still sacred. So we treat it with that kind of reverence There's still reverence there. Um, and the native Canadian I was telling you about, who ran the sweat lodges, you know, there was never any sense that he never talked in terms of us running them ourselves and finding our own way of doing it. And, you know, that's something I've thought about a lot for many years. It's many years since I've seen him. But you do need to do that. If you're a teacher, you need to be able to um, give give your pupils, yeah, something to run with, something to do themselves. Yeah. They need to be able to find their own way into it. Otherwise, they get disempowered. Otherwise, they just remain in awe of tradition, and that's no good. That's no good at all. So yeah, it's interesting for me why he didn't do that. And so, what was it that he was doing? What are you doing if you're a traditional teacher and you come over here and you teach your tradition, which has its own place, has its own use, but you don't give people something to run with that they can develop themselves? What's the point? And it's a whole journey for you if you are an Indigenous teacher. Yeah, is finding your way through to do that. It takes a lot. There were one or two Native Americans who did that, like Harley Swift deer, yeah, or Ohio Storm. And it sounds that, I mean, they were half charlatans as well. There was stuff that was genuinely dodgy about them. Or Sun Bear. You don't hear bad things about him, yeah? He was Native American, but he was really trying to make it relevant for us. And not many of them do that. And the ones who do that, they get a lot of criticism for selling out. Yeah. So there's a whole politics there. And we can get drawn into that politics. You see it with Tibetan Buddhism. You see Westerners being drawn into the politics um, of Tibet. Yeah, and this practice is good, and other people say no, it's black magic. You mustn't do it. And you've got the Dalai Lama on one side and someone else on the other side, and the Westerners get drawn into these two sides as well. And so, don't get drawn into the Native American politics. Just, you know, run what you've learned, teach what you've learned with integrity. And if you're doing with it integrity, it doesn't matter if you balls it up occasionally, you forget something, all that. I forget stuff, and then I remember later. So it's that's fine. That's fine. But go and run these things. Find a way of running these things. They're such meaningful, such joyful things to do. They'll do you good and they'll do other people good as well. And in so doing, we really claim our own connection within this culture to the spirit, to the universal spirit that runs through everything. Okay, I will leave it there for now.